Tipperary in Ireland. Thanks for speaking with me today. It's been I've been wanting to get you on for quite a long time. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I think I need to start by saying that we met on the course when I was living in Ireland in Clonmel, the Carl Jung Psychology with Art Therapy course. And so I was really pleased to have met someone else with an English accent there. I wasn't the only one, because it was quite everyone there was Irish, I guess, and yeah, so it was quite nice for me to meet up with you, and we've been friends ever since. It's been a good while now, hasn't it?
Yeah, we started in 2014, so that's been 6 years.
Yeah, God, it's flown by. And it was such a brilliant course, wasn't it, David?
It was. I did an early one in 2010, 2011, and I have to say, absolutely changed my life. And then the follow-up, the second one in 2014, 2015 was brilliant, and those intervening 4 years gave me a lot of elbow room to kind of try and make some sense out of all the profound information and the complex concepts that Jung kind of offers. And the 2014-2015 course was pretty much the same material, but one step up. But I had a really good grasp of it by that point, and it was just the most wonderful consolidation. It really fantastic. He's changed my life.
It did. It changed I'm sure it's changed a lot of people's lives. And I think for anyone who is in Ireland, or even I think if you were in England, I think you could still participate because it's online for most of it, and then you meet up once a month for about 7 or 8 months. So it would be quite doable for someone. But it definitely is a life changer. And the group that we had online, we had an online, I think it was a Google group or something. All of the participants of the course were on there. We were sharing and we were kind of learning together, and it was such a great. It was so valuable. And I remember when it finished, feeling really very sad. I could cope with the course finishing, but that group, the support that I got from that online group was immense. Did you find the same?
Yeah, there was a definite darkening of mood, and I really felt that a very valuable resource had somehow kind of just evaporated once the course was finished.
Yeah.
And okay, there were moments when I thought, if I hear the word archetype again, I'm going to scream. But by the same token, there was a feeling of kind of consistency, and I could turn to the group, and the body of learning that was on offer was just so reassuring. And because, you know, Jung tends to deconstruct and then reconstruct. So you do find for some people, the nature of the information is such that they do unravel somewhat. Well, we all unravel, but some people can't put themselves back together. So there is a sense with Jung that you do have to be quite circumspect, and not everyone will get him, and not everyone will be able to make the most of what's on offer. And I remember Marie-Louise von France saying that Jung was too difficult and he was too ahead of his time. And it's only now, 60 years after his death, that research is actually beginning to confirm what he has said. So to be 60 years, even 70, 80 years ahead of your time is remarkable.
Yeah, well, he was definitely a remarkable man. I mean, kind of bringing in spirituality, sort of esoteric sciences, and also psychology. It gives a real sort of holistic understanding of the human, which I haven't found anywhere else really. There are lots of different sort of elements that he kind of brought together that kind of show us who we are. And I remember when I was going through the beginning of the course, I was very new to him. I'd read Memories, Dreams and Reflections beforehand. I'd had a dream that set me on the path to take the course and all this stuff. But the artwork that was coming out at me at the time, that I couldn't understand. Like, I was drawing all these things. I was absolutely horrified by what I was producing. But hearing some of his quotes at that time, and reflecting them back to me, they all made sense. It was almost like a mirror. It's like every time I heard something from him, it was like a mirror to reflect on myself, and I could understand myself better from that. And that's part of the reason why I set up the group. First of all, because the online presence of having that support group online was such a benefit for me, and it was so sad when it went. And then also to kind of keep on putting out some of the wisdom that he has in the form of quotes and memes or whatever. But still, when you're looking at yourself and you're introspecting and you're doing your shadow work, whenever you kind of come to some wisdom that he has, sometimes it just knocks you, because it just shows you who you are, what you're going through, and that you're not alone. I mean, just the fact that he had his with the red book, when he wrote the red book, and the kind of what do you call it, the confrontation with the unconscious that he had, and the dialogue the inner dialogue that he had, that alone, it shows some kind of level of what do you call, I guess he went kind of crazy for a time, some in terms of what we would consider as crazy. He was living up in his I don't know, in the higher realms, I guess, and having conversations with his inner self, and that was showing him the truth of who he was, and he was able to express that through his artwork and through his writings. And I know that you did a lot of work on the red book recently with our lovely teachers that we had.
Yes.
How was that? Tell us.
We spent about a year and a half reading through the red book from cover to cover, and it's known as the unread red book because it's so difficult. And a lot of it was kind of re-edited, and he put all his initial experiences down in a series of black books. He then transferred all of that into a very ornate kind of medieval manuscript style red book, and that kind of evolved, but he spent a considerable amount of time on it, and as he himself said, all of his later work emerged from the red book and the contents of the red book. So when you're reading the red book, there is a lot of stuff where there's different voices, and there's different styles, and one of the difficulties for the translators was how to translate sometimes very old, very archaic German into English. So, this idea of lost in translation. There are some parts of it where it's very kind of quite Zen, quite Buddhist in a strange kind of way. And there are other parts which are kind of like fairy stories, and some of the characters that he meets, they kind of re-emerge later in the book. So we've got, for example, the Red Knight. He has an encounter with the Red Knight 2 or 3 times, and the Red Knight goes through this whole process of transformation. And of course, Philemon, he's one of the major characters, and also Salome. It's fascinating, but it's something that you really have to dedicate yourself to, and you really have to, you can't possibly follow his mind. So the red book is your own individual experience. You can get a glimpse of what he may be going through, but the significance and the kind of importance of all the major archetypes which appear, they will have an individual flavor, because we can't possibly know what they meant for him.
So this Salome, what's I mean, we're going to talk about Anima and Animus in a minute, and so maybe this is a good way to start us with Salome. But what stage was she in terms of his Anima?
Well, in the red book, she's initially blind, and she's in the company of Philemon. So symbolically, this would show how Jung had neglected his anima energies, and of course, being very much a product of his time and very much a product of where he came from, women were basically ignored, and they were neglected, and they were treated as a kind of alien species. So you have to take the cultural context very much into account when you're reading the Red Book, because there are some parts which are totally and utterly politically incorrect and outrageous to our more modern sensitivities. So Salome initially is blind, and throughout the book, he meets up with her on a number of occasions, and eventually she sees. But there's this kind of really strange scene where he is up on this cross and he's kind of being squeezed by this very large serpent, and Salome roundly declares that he is Christ, and then she sees. So in a way, recognizing the power of the anima for Jung was perhaps one of the most important things that he could do. He still had trouble with that throughout the course of his life, but at least he was ready, or he was willing to engage with it on a more fundamental level. And I think for a lot of men, they still have this difficulty with the anima. And the anima energies are neglected, and men suffer because of that, and you can see that.
Okay, so let's talk about the anima and animus. Well, we start with the anima. I mean, obviously, not obviously, but there seems to be three sort of main kind of stages of development of the anima that Jung spoke about. Do you want to talk about what they are?
Well, men and women, Jung's initial kind of premise was that anima, the feminine, represented the soul. So of course he was all about complementarity and polarity. So of course men would have anima, and this would be the soul. So that would mean by extension, the implication being that women would have animus, they wouldn't have anima, therefore they had no soul. So the initial kind of construct around anima and animus was very gender-based, and also, as we were saying earlier, culturally, as a part of his time, post-Jungians, of course, have moved so far beyond these kind of stereotypical masculine and feminine qualities. But anima essentially is the feminine energy that we both possess, and the animus will be the masculine, which, of course, we both possess. And it's really more about how we engage with those energies and how they manifest and how they drive behavior. But you do find for a lot of men who are not used to exploring or working with the feminine per se, any notion of femininity, and they tend to kind of freeze. So I think anima is still somewhat neglected with men. I mean, you hear this classic thing now where, oh, he's in touch with his feminine, and that gives you this kind of mental impression of an effete male, but it's nothing at all about that. It's really more about intuition, empathy, sensitivity, all these kind of feminine energies rather than gender. I remember I was doing an image once with a client, and embedded within the image there was this kind of fairy princess in her long dress, and she was running through the forest. So when this emerged, there were like icicles descending from the ceiling. The male, froze and absolutely resisted any notion that he was feminine. And that really illustrated to me how it's still very much misunderstood. Not about this kind of the feminine thing, it's more about the feminine energies that are part and parcel of a whole healthy universe. We both need the feminine and the masculine as complementarity.
Absolutely. I mean, I think part of the whole problem with this is that most people have got no idea of the sort of inner masculine or inner feminine, and I you know, in terms of what you were saying about sort of gender roles and how, you know, some people could be quite offended if you consider some of the what we might call sort of feminine qualities and masculine qualities, but actually it's they are archetypal, I think, and they are sort of archaic, and I think that they do need, and actually they're a very good guide, you know, an understandable way. If we label them as sort of traditionally masculine and feminine sort of qualities or proclivities or energies or whatever, that it makes it far easier to understand and incorporate. I mean, what I see generally in society is that a lot of men have got some very well developed feminine qualities now, is what I see, but actually at the expense of their masculinity. And so it is about, you know, all of us, men and women, trying to look inside and see, you know, how are we traditionally, you know, where do they fall, and have I gone too far into one and not the other? And actually, you know, as archetypally, I mean, maybe that's another way to look at it anyway, is to look at sort of the archetype that we are generally embodying in our life at the moment, and seeing, you know, have I gone too far into this archetype? Am I too much the I don't know, let's say the warrior, and perhaps I need to kind of calm down and maybe, you know, become maybe more the carer or something like this. Maybe the polar opposite. But I do think that the one of the main problems that we have is that most people don't realize about this inner masculine and inner feminine quality sort of balance that we need to attain. And sometimes even people that don't even get into psychology, they seem to be able to work on themselves enough that they're able to come to a balance, and especially in later life as well.
Yeah.
But so should we go with the I guess the first kind of immature projection of anima. So the sort of Helen, is it Helen you called her?
Yeah, Helen. So of course Helen becomes she's the desirable, beautiful female. She's the ultimate prize. You get some very beautiful women who cling to the Helen persona throughout their entire lives.
Mm-hmm.
So as a pure example of that, if you think of someone, say, like Pamela Anderson,
yeah,
or even if you go further back, say, Charlie's Angels, this kind of feminine archetypal Helen, you know, beautiful, alluring, incredibly attractive, and they trade on that. I mean, especially Pamela Anderson, she was the archetypal Helen.
mm-hmm.
And what's difficult is if we identify with a particular stage, then it's very, very difficult to let go of that and move into another stage. So you find for a lot of very beautiful women who have traded and identified with that Hellenic beauty, the aging process becomes horrific because they have to leave Helen behind and move into another manifestation of the anima, and that becomes almost like a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Botox and this, that, and the next thing in order to try to maintain that Hellenic aspect.
It's funny, so because a friend of mine recently had loads of Botox on her face, and what happens to women when they have it is that they end up this like cat face. Their face kind of gets wider around here, and and actually it just defeats the whole object because there's no beauty in it. Yeah, and actually what people can see is, you can see when people have Botox. That's just my opinion. I'm just not for it at all, and also it's chemicals as well. But yeah, I get that. But then there's also the projection, isn't there? There has to be a hook, but also like if a man only kind of is looking for this kind of this idea of beauty and perfection in terms of how they look aesthetically, there's nothing underneath that. And so what they're doing is they're projecting this idea of what they want onto a very beautiful woman without actually realizing who or what she is. And that's when the problems happen, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the problem for a lot of men in terms of their relationship to anima, is the fact that they don't get past the very early stages or the kind of engagement with anima, and they don't really want anima as anything else but Helen. And you find men in their 60s or men who are suffering midlife crisis, they will certainly try to re-find or reconnect with that earlier anima as Helen, and they'll trade in a loving partner for somebody who is younger and less experienced. And a lot of men they find it difficult to engage with the anima, say, as spiritual companion, someone who's a source of wisdom and who actually knows as more, if not more, than they do.
So what's really going on underneath then? You know, like if let's just say it's a common story that men have a midlife crisis and leave their wife, their aging wife, and I laugh, for, I don't know why, they leave their aging wife for a younger model, and then you know, it doesn't take very long for them to realize that there's nothing there either. You know, there's nothing there for them. So
Yeah.
what is it inside of them that they need to do to try and I don't know, do they have to age their own inner feminine? Is this the thing they have to do? They have to kind of give her some new qualities. Do they have to realize how she plays out within him?
Yeah, and also when you think, say, of identifying with a particular persona, we all at some point have a very clear idea of who we think we are and who we want to be. So there is a certain school of man who would want to maintain that kind of virility. They want to have the kind of masculinity that doesn't diminish with age, so they're still very capable and they're still very this, and there's a very clear or very set interpretation of what masculinity should be. And again, the animus as spiritual guide or mentor, for a lot of men, they don't really want to transform into that. They still want to keep the earlier versions of the animus energy.
So this is really about like the man not having developed maturity within himself
Yeah,
as a whole overall person,
yeah,
and this is why his anima is still very sort of immature, and and
undeveloped.
and I guess like the mindset is actually still quite immature. So this person hasn't developed into their whole into what they have potential to be. They haven't individuated. They haven't introspected. They haven't looked at themselves. They don't know who they are. This is
Yeah.
who that person is. So I mean, lots of I'd say that this person will be in a lot of pain, will be kind of, you know, always feeling a little bit maybe a slight sort of underlying depression, but never really getting to the bottom of where it came from. But perhaps there's enough distractions that they don't even have to realize it anyway.
Mm.
um, but I guess when it starts to hurt, when it starts to hurt too much and people do start to look inside of themselves, you know, what is the next stage for you? Let's just say a man in his 40s or 50s is still kind of attracting that kind of woman and realizes that they haven't come to fruition of who they have potential to be. Then what would you say is the stage, the next stage for them in terms of their personal development?
Individuation really is very much about leaving behind all those constructs
Mm-hmm.
and leaving behind identification with the persona and really embracing the fact that we are maturing, we are leaving behind all semblance of youth and the feeling that willingly embracing and transforming into a more evolved or a more experienced version of our younger selves is just as rewarding and perhaps even more exciting, because leaving all the tremendous energy that's required to maintain that younger self, once we accept the fact that we cannot really maintain that indefinitely, it becomes a really kind of almost like a profound portal into a more serious exploration of who we really are, because keeping it all preserved in aspic or Botox to within an inch of its life, it becomes very artificial, and there's so much energy devoted to that that there's very little left over for anything else. And I do agree with Jung in the sense that he postulated there is this kind of embedded turning point within the psyche where we will ultimately turn inwards. And it's that process of an antiodroma where all the excitement and the focus on the outside world begins to pall, the novelty wears off, and there is this incremental shift to a more interior view of life. But you do find people who will ignore that prompt.
Mm-hmm.
It's there, they're very aware of it, but it terrifies them, or it's very unwelcome because it means they have to shift and move, and all the investment that they've given to that particular persona appears to be kind of like pointless.
I mean, I always say that people will only do shadow work or will only introspect when they when they have kind of really hit rock bottom, when they're so sick of being sick, when they're so kind of when they really want to, when they have to have the will has to be there to say, I want to know what's going on with me, I want to heal, I want to be better than this, I can envisage something better for myself. But that fire has to be there, because it's very easy to distract yourself in this day and age, and actually shadow work takes a lot of effort and a lot of pain and a lot of, you know, kind of trawling through, and, you know, having to kind of die to yourself and be reborn again. And I have, at the moment, there's a lot of people on the group who are very who are really suffering, going through some big changes in their lives, or kind of just at that stage, even that first stage where they realize that their behavior is not conducive to a healthy lifestyle, but they keep on and they keep on, and they haven't got to that point yet. So this is the point where they have to start introspecting and finding out the reasons why, and to start looking at, you know, mummy and daddy, and you know, and how their parenting affected them, and what the effects were, and their trauma, and all of you know, kind of really trawling it all up. And through that process, I don't know if it happened to you, but there was a lot of remembering, re-putting back together. Did you find that as well when you were doing your introspection?
It's funny you should say that, because I'm doing I'm currently doing, you know, the 21-day meditation, Deepak Chopra meditation course.
Oh, really?
So what's been very interesting in that is, one of the days you have to find 50 people in your life who have contributed something to you. And at the beginning you think, oh, 50, that's a lot. But when you actually begin, if you are kind of like really sensitive to what people have given to you, there's hundreds of people who have contributed something wonderful to your life. And it's a very affirming and very kind of enriching experience to reconnect with somebody or people who have actually given you something. And it kind of encourages a sense of gratitude.
Yeah.
But conversely, you have to ask the question, why have I chosen this person and not that person? And it's equally revealing when you think, okay, well, I've got that person, but I don't really want to put them on my list. Why not?
Right. Okay.
And that's
yeah, that will say a lot, wouldn't it?
Yeah. That's where the shadow starts to emerge, in the sense that, well, I like this person, or that person changed my life, but I resent, or something has happened that I don't want to give them an equal footing to someone else I've chosen.
Yeah, I see that. My goodness. Okay, well, will we go back to the Anima, and let's look at the middle stage, will we? So we kind of spoke about the Helen being, you know, the lovely, beautiful maiden that we want to, I don't know, want to be their prince. I guess there's also this awful thing about sort of fairy tales, and the negative impact of fairy tales is that a girl will have this idea that a prince is going to turn up on a white horse and take her away from everything, and, you know, provide her everything that she needs. She won't have to sew or feed the pigs or anything. She'll just have to sit in her pretty castle and do nothing. And then there's that expectation as the girl gets older that someone's going to actually do this for her in the, you know, in the sense of whatever it is sort of now. But and that's quite a pressure on the man as well, isn't it? But that's something completely different. Let's go back onto the medium, the Anima in the middle stage.
So once you have kind of learned to let go of the alluring, persuasive grip of Helen, then you are free to become something else. And then the Anima frees itself up to become more, say, friend. But you do find there are some holier than thou kind of aspects to the Anima, where we hold up, say, the perfect, like, say, the Virgin Mary. She becomes this impossible archetype of purity, modesty, humility, perfection. And then an ordinary living human woman is found wanting, because she cannot match this kind of incredible list of wonderful qualities offered by that archetype. And for a lot of centuries, women really suffered under that yoke, because there's no way they were going to be comparable to this perfect archetypal anima figure.
Mm-hmm.
So anima, once she's free from the kind of the more, shall we say, earthbound aspect, she can become friends, she can become a source of spiritual knowledge, she can become, again, the mother. There's a lot more in it that is not defined purely by her physical beauty. And I think it is a trap, and because physical beauty is so highly prized, there is a temptation to try to keep that Helen archetype, that part of your anima, as long as possible. And then, of course, you suffer for that because all these other wonderful, finer qualities to the anima are neglected.
Mm-hmm. There is also this idea about projection, and I know, like, men will project, and you know, in terms of a man's development, his own development of anima, there is this idea that he needs to retract his projection. So to
Yeah.
be very aware of the fact that he's looking for this kind of this beauty and this wonderful kind of all these aesthetic qualities, and to retract them. How easy is that going to be?
It's not, because it's very much tied in with this is what a woman should be. This is this is the kind of worthwhile quality of a woman. Other qualities to femininity are not as highly prized, and therefore they're not of interest, and therefore I don't want to look for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the identification with the kind of animus, where I am, say, I'm a James Bond. I'm strong and I'm free and I'm physically fit and I'm this and I'm that. That kind of interpretation of masculinity is also highly prized, and a lot of men struggle when they realize they can't keep that up. They've got aching hips, or they've got sore joints, or they've got erectile dysfunction, whatever it might be. Again, that sense of who they were tends to evaporate. And you have to embrace that movement. You have to really be willing to let go of a fixed stage and move into something else. Otherwise, you are like the feminine, you're going to suffer.
I guess. I mean, the first stage is the consciousness, isn't it? It's becoming aware of the fact that you're actually doing this,
Yeah.
And that's the key, isn't it? I mean, once you know, then you have the will to want to change, then you can start to kind of say, okay, right, well, that, you know, that 18-year-old woman, you know, obviously isn't going to be, or that, you know, to stop projecting that kind of that want and desire onto her, and maybe think, actually, maybe I need to do something, maybe look at maybe someone a bit older and for different qualities, because those qualities are not going to feed my soul at the moment. That, you know, I've kind of come a long way, and I'm further down the line.
Yeah.
So in terms of the next stage, what do you call her? So the first one you called her Helen. What's the second stage? Did you say? Sorry.
There are different names. I would say I can't quite remember what her name is, but
No, I can't either.
it's really more about the willingness to recognize that if we hold something in stasis, if we freeze something, then we freeze ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole notion that older women who have so much to offer are invisible,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't attract any male attention, that's the classic kind of Helen syndrome, where for a lot of people, women are only important or interesting or desirable when they are in their Helen guise. And you get, I should have looked this up, I can't remember the names.
Well, don't worry, because I mean, she's most definitely the mother archetype, isn't she? She's
Yeah.
the bringer of life now, and she has some wisdom. She hasn't come into her full power,
Yeah.
but she's most definitely, you know, bringing life to all. And I can't think of anything else. Give me some words, David.
Uh, as the mother, she becomes the kind of, she leaves the maiden behind, and the mother
Mm-hmm.
becomes, I mean, not every woman is going to become a mother,
No.
but you do find that there are some women who are perfectly happy to move into the next phase without necessarily having children.
Yeah.
So for me, it's, if you're perfectly happy to remain childless, then that is a choice that will still inform your life. And you find, you know, the old adage, oh yeah, you know, I'm not a true woman unless I've had a baby. And for a lot of women, that becomes kind of like quite a challenging thing, because you can still be a true, full, happy person without having children. It's not a kind of a defining thing in terms of femininity at all.
No, it's not. But I guess it is one of the sort of archetypal qualities, is that nurturing. It's that nurturing and that sort of that kind of creating a home and comfort and all of, but you don't need to have a child to do that. I have friends who have, you know, partners, and they have kind of created that situation for themselves and their partner,
Yeah.
and I see that they still kind of fulfill that role within that relationship, and not even within that part. Perhaps it's just that they create it for themselves, depending. But I guess the middle stage is about sort of you know, maybe more comfort and nurturing and bringing life in whatever way that is. It can be with a child, it can be, you know, not with children, but it's most definitely the second stage and the more mature stage from the initial stage of Helen. And so let's talk about then the last stage, or the final kind of stage of anima projection, and what that looks like.
This is very much about once you've left behind the source of youth and you've left behind the connection to I've got to be beautiful all the time. Once you have become more attuned to your own potentiality, then you find that this particular stage of the feminine emerges effortlessly and becomes very much more about, yes please, becomes very much more about how you can find true self without finding yourself into a box or giving yourself, well, I've got to be like this, I'm 50 now, I need to be blah, 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 or I'm 35 and I'm yeah. And it's really letting go of the archetypal stereotypes almost, and finding the way through to what really frees you up. So when you get to a particular stage of maturity, ideally we should be able to use our experience. We should be able to use all the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune to create a greater sensitivity and a greater awareness of what really makes us tick. So you need to be able to maintain that interest, and you need to be consistent. You can't just do it on a part-time basis. It requires a full commitment.
I think that for me the last stage of anima is it doesn't relate to an age as such, but it most definitely relates to a person who's self-realized and who is wise and has self-knowledge and also some life experience as well. I don't think you can kind of reach it at a very young age anyway. I think you need to have that life experience to be able to sort of really sit in your own power, and to not have too many sort of prejudices about, you know, what you should be or what society says you should be, or, you know, or how you should look and all those kinds of things. And in terms of how men kind of their own maturity, I guess when they come to a point where they need to have, or they desire a woman for her, you know, not just for how she looks, but also for what she brings in terms of her wisdom and her and how they kind of talk to each other, and their sense of humor and their companionship and all those things together, then that is most definitely a new stage of development for the man. It reflects in his interest in women and his anima, and how that has been integrated.
And it also reflects his kind of understanding of women, because the whole feeling of having a woman as a particular kind of archetype is extremely limiting, and you do find, you know, this whole thing, oh yeah, men and women can't be friends, there's always going to be a sexual element in there, and the man's always going to, yeah. To my mind, that's absolute rubbish, because we free ourselves from that in order to see the full spectrum of anima. And if you are clinging to a particular version or interpretation of what anima is, then you're going to treat everyone in the same way. So you will have no interest in an older, more mature, more experienced, intelligent woman, because she doesn't fit in with the Helen thing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of men don't necessarily want a woman to be spiritually evolved or to give them a greater sense of cosmic intelligence. That's not what women are for. So it really depends very much on initially what your view or what your interpretation of these energies are. Because there are a lot of women as well who perhaps would not want a man who is sensitive and who cries easily and blah, blah, blah. They're still a kind of, for a large school of people, they want these traditional roles. And that's where I think the conflict comes in, when people don't live up to those roles or find it very difficult to fulfill those roles. And they feel imprisoned, and that's why, for example, you have a very high rate of suicide in young males, especially here in Ireland, because there's a very kind of set view of what the animus should be and how that should manifest. And that runs counterintuitive for a lot of young men, because they're not encouraged to connect with any other version of that. And they find themselves wanting, and they get very depressed, and they get very anxious, and they find themselves kind of viewing themselves almost as losers or failures.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd say for a young person, a young man, if his anima is at the stage of Helen, then having any sort of female friends, I guess any woman is going to be potential for him. You know,
Yeah.
in terms of like having a proper friendship, without any kind of idea of any kind of, you know, idea of potential sex in the future with another woman, it's not going to happen for him, because his anima is so underdeveloped that every young beauty is, or even not beauty is a potential for him, so he can't have that relationship. I mean, that kind of says everything, doesn't it?
Yeah. I was watching RuPaul's Drag Race the other night, and that's a very interesting kind of manifestation, because essentially it's men manifesting their anima, but in the most kind of, not necessarily cartoonish way, but there's a kind of an exaggerated feminine that emerges. But RuPaul was talking, and he said that for him, interestingly, even though he's extremely successful and he is known for his drag, there was a point when he felt he was pushing it too far, and that he was exaggerating the feminine to such an extent that there was this kind of crisis where, you know, he didn't know if there was any animals left.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I find that quite interesting, because we do, in a sense, we're very aware of gender, and we're very aware of other people's gender, but there are some of us who don't identify with that. So it's really more about, are we connecting with animus energy, or are we connecting with anima, or hopefully, and more importantly, are we connecting with both?
Mm-hmm.
So you find with, say, someone like RuPaul, he's so, there's something about that man which is just so incredibly creative, and I'm a huge fan of his work. And if someone like him can struggle with manifesting anima, but again, it's, some of it's kind of incredibly beautiful, and you find some of the people on the show are really, they're just focusing on the Helen aspect, because they're stunning, they look absolutely beautiful, and they are the perfect feminine. But there are others who would choose perhaps to express the anima in a more creative way, and they become kind of like phantasmagorical figures, witches with horns, or so the encounter with anima in that sense is very much more fully explored.
Mm-hmm. I mean, sorry, go on.
I think a lot of men could benefit from exploring that anima, because for a lot of men, anima is chained. Their own anima energies are locked away and they're repressed and they're feared. And that's why you find a lot of men fear women, or they're disrespectful to women because they fear their own anima. And I know that's a generalization, but it still rings true.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I was going to say actually is, you know, with the sort of drag queen aspect, very often with these drag queens, they bring out the very terrible aspects of femininity. They grossly exaggerate the
Yeah.
very the worst of what a woman can
Yeah.
be or is.
Yeah.
So I mean, in terms of he was worried that he couldn't find his animus. There was no more masculinity left. I wonder also, was there much kind of positive anima there either? I mean, because I mean, from I don't really know him, but I know, I'm just thinking in terms of what I know of drag. Generally, it's usually the kind of the darker aspects of female psychology they like to sort of play on.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
But what can I ask though? So let's talk about how we integrate the anima. Especially, we've been talking mostly for men, you know, for men to integrate the anima within. So how would you say that they need to do this? Men need to do this.
I think men need to, well, not all men, of course, but if a man is fearful of anima energies, then ultimately it boils down to how they want to see themselves. And when our sense of identity is challenged, there is a kind of a sense of threat. And a lot of men would find that very uncomfortable. But it's really because traditionally they have kind of given sensitivity, they've given intuition, they've given empathy, they've given all of these kind of yin energies away. And that's not part of how they would see masculinity. But in order to integrate anima energies, I think the first step would be to accept that anima is very much part and parcel of the psyche. And within the male psyche, anima is firmly embedded. So it's really important for mental health and also for spiritual balance that anima is respected and honored in the same way that they are giving credence and value to the animus.
Mm-hmm.
And neglecting the anima is very injurious. And the first thing for me would be to ask themselves, why am I so afraid of this? And of course, any sign of fear, this is a short side of shadow. So integration of anima becomes very much shadow work, because it's not only what we fear or what we loathe about ourselves, but it's also untapped potential.
Mm-hmm.
So it's energy which lies fallow, which is unused, and anima energies can elevate the masculine to a whole new level. So I would say, all you guys out there, embrace your anima.
It's tough. One of the things that I say about the animus integration is to recognize it. First of all, the way that I'd say to recognize the animus is to notice the recurring thoughts in the head, and whose voice are they in. And so I'm wondering, would it be the same with anima for men? It probably is. I'd say it would. I mean, for a woman, it would probably more take on the father's voice, or it could even sometimes take on the mother's voice. So there is something about going back to that kind of, you know, our parenting, our primary caregivers, whether it's parents or whoever,
yeah,
and their attitude, their psychic attitude, that the inside, the attitude inside that they don't maybe express, or they don't think they're expressing, the unconscious attitude, or the actual, you know, how they're actually spoken to. becomes very much the voice that tells us what we can and can't do inside of our heads. It becomes our regular thought patterns. And that also can have a lot to do with how anima is developed. Actually, we might want to talk about that, how it's developed. Should we do that? So I mean, with the anima, it's very much about the mother, isn't it? The mother, or the primary female caregiver, the teachers, the aunties, the grandmothers, all of those people. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
To my mind, anima becomes it's an accretion of layers of experience, and it's an accretion of interaction with women per se. So of course, mothers become your first exposure and first integration of anima energies. So again, it's really very much about how the mother wishes to see the child. So the child's experience becomes very much more about how the mother is kind of reacting and responding to the child, and the child learns to moderate behavior in order to keep mother happy. There's a feeling as well sometimes that in the very early years, up to about 2, there is no division between child and mother, so it's kind of like shared psychic space. And mother anima energies become all-encompassing. So there is the sense that the child swims within an ocean of anima. More so perhaps. Some children are very lucky and they have a loving father who contributes fully to the child's development, but primarily it's still really mother who spends most time, or the balance of time, with the child. So the child has much more access to the anima energy. If that's devouring, or if that's very conditional, or if that becomes like really cruel and uncaring, then of course the initial exposure to anima becomes like the sense of danger that comes with that. Whereas if the anima becomes all-encompassing and smothering, then that's equally difficult to break free of, because then anima becomes something that you have to get away from. So you often find that there are men who don't want a repeat of that smothering anima or the smothering mother. So as they mature, they tend to be a lot more distant from women, and they're not as willing to commit to an emotional integration with anima energies, because they've had it and they don't want any more of it.
I mean, that they can either kind of see it a mile off and run, or what they do instead is because it's so familiar to them, they attract it. They attract it back in their relationships. So this is the thing. I mean, this is why with shadow work we have to start looking at our relationships and seeing where there's like a regular pattern of types of people that you attract, and the type of situation that you attract, and the type of position that you're in. Are you the person who is or is it a balanced relationship, or is it that you're constantly being told what to do? Do you give too much? Do you have boundaries? What are your expectations? All of these things. Not easy.
There's also feeling sometimes with anima that it's treated very badly, or it's not respected or honored. So you often find that there are men who will abuse anima. They will treat women very badly, and for me that's always a sure flag that they have no idea what anima actually means, and by treating women badly, they are denying their own anima energy. If you are connected in and you are comfortable with your own anima energy, then there is absolutely, it's unthinkable that you would treat women in any other way but respectfully and as, you know, equals, because you understand that anima energy is a central driving power, and you can't, well, people do, I mean, I know they do, but it's just, it seems somehow, it's a sure flag of imbalance when you find domestic tyrants even. Men who wish to control, and men who denigrate women, and men who are very disrespectful, and there's a kind of a feeling that, guys, get a grip.
I have to say here as well, you know, that there's also been a huge kind of showing of domestic tyrants who are female as well. So it goes both ways. I think
It
kind of.
certainly does.
But yeah, so I mean, and if, you know, in terms of like practical ways to sort of to deal with the anima, but what I always say about the animus integration, and I've said it to you before actually, is when I was working on my animus and I realized that he was lacking and that I had to sort of redecorate him with traits from other men that I found around me. At that time, I was doing the course, and you were there at the course, and there were others. There's some other really brilliant people there, some other brilliant men. And I started looking to see, okay, so what traits do these guys have? Okay, so we've got kindness, caring, assertive, vulnerable, strong, and all of these kind of things. And from what you were all talking about, I was always kind of watching to see how you were and what you were doing and how your life was. And I was picking little bits from you guys. and through that, I was kind of redecorating my inner animus. And I was thinking, okay, so and thinking about where I was lacking these traits. Where was I lacking? You know, was I not forthright? Was I not kind of always contributing to conversation, or just looking to see where I could improve, and taking it from you guys as well. And through that was a very sort of useful, practical way for me to identify where my animus was lacking. How it was dominating my thoughts as well, because it was very much my father's voice saying, no, you can't, no, you're shit, you're not going to do well at this. It was all that kind of discussion that I was having inside my head that I had no idea about, because you get so used to it. You get so used to the regular thought patterns because they're regular, you don't know any different. But when you start to pull them apart and you become aware of them and you realize where they come from and who they sound like, then you can start working with them, and you can change them. And what it does is it changes your whole perception once you do that. So for all of those people out there who are kind of, you know, struggling with one thing or another, once they start looking into animus and anima integration and what it means and how it plays out for them, it's a very useful thing to do. But do you think that in terms of how I sort of redecorated my inner animus, that would work the same for the anima?
Absolutely. It's showing a willingness to open oneself to other people, but also it's a willingness to let go of deeply embedded beliefs, and also it's a willingness to say that I will benefit from change and I will benefit from allowing myself to let go and to grow. You know that saying from Anais Nin, I've always loved it. She said something along these lines. And one day I realized it was more painful to stay tightly closed as a bud than to let go and blossom.
Yeah, that's it. Brilliant. I love that.
So that idea of, again, when our sense of identity is under threat, you do find this accompanying resistance. So people who have invested heavily in a particular persona will fight tooth and nail to preserve that sense of identity. So the first thing to do really is to ask, why do we need to guard and protect this very ossified, sedimented sense of identity? What is so fearful about letting go of something and moving forward? And you often find that it doesn't occur really. There's no real need to change. Even if people are suffering, they will cling to that sense of identity because that's really all they understand. So there's no need to do that. You can let go and you can blossom. And this is really what it's all about. The individuation process encourages us to let go and to grow. And it may be partly fearful, but by the same token, it's incredibly exciting, it's rewarding, and you will never go back.
Absolutely. It is a calling, isn't it? And like you said, you have to really be in a place of suffering to and have something that just says, no, I'm not gonna continue like this.
Hmm.
So I was just listening to you there, and I just realised that you have a halo of numbers around you.
I do, yeah.
JC,
Jesus Christ,
period.
superstar.
Yeah, so God, so I think we've covered quite a lot on the anima. I think it's going to really help people. I think it's going to help people to identify. Do you have anything else that you want to bring to the table about the anima before we finish up now?
I would say that if you embrace the anima willingly and with love, don't be too hard on yourself, and she's not to be feared. She is there. It, anima energies are part and parcel of who we are. They're an integral part of the psyche. They are definitely worth investing in and embracing. And once we free the anima, then life gets better.
It does, absolutely. This is great. Well, listen, thanks so much, David, for speaking
Thank
with me
you.
today, and hopefully we'll speak again another time. I've
Yeah.
got lots of different subjects, especially like getting the speaking to someone who knows about Jung is really useful actually to speak. It'd be really
Right.
useful to speak to you today. But listen, take care, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, David.